Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about The Last of Us Season 2 Episode 3. It's called The Path. So spoilers for the episode as always. I will do my best to keep it free of any game spoilers. I will make some comparisons based on things that have already been shown, but I'll keep that quiet. This is an interesting episode. It's definitely the most low-key episode of the season. I think the first one of the season is probably my favourite so far. 2 obviously had big high highs, but I think, had a lot of new additions and it was kind of doing some big swings and it was pretty fun, but I think I like the more quiet stuff in episode 1 more. This is a really interesting episode in that it kind of does the most new things of the season compared to the game. There's a lot of stuff that's added in here pertaining how Ellie's decision to leave Jackson and go to Seattle kind of comes up. There's an introduction of a group in this episode that originally in the game don't appear until later. And this scenario of which they are presented in here is new. The specific predicament of which we see. This is the weird thing, is that they've not named this group yet in the show. So I feel like I shouldn't say the name. They've actually got 2 names, weirdly. But I feel like I shouldn't say them yet because they've not actually been brought up in the show. But I'm talking about the whistling group with the logo on their jackets. That is a group from the game. It's interesting seeing them in a somewhat sympathetic light here in this episode. But more on that in a little bit because that kind of ties back into Ellie and Dina's stuff later on. So naturally, there's some changes here. One is the more defined time jump after the incident, the 3 months later. That is not something that's in the game. At least it's not spoken or shown in the game specifically. I mean, maybe you could maybe interpret there's some time passed, but this idea that Ellie's been in the hospital for months was definitely not in there. So that's also a change. I did really like the opening scene with Tommy saying "say hello to Sarah" to Joel's body in the watch, close-ups and all that. I thought that was quite nice. The Ellie stuff's really interesting though, because in the game, she is just, she's upset, right? In that scene where she goes into the house and the box is there with the watch and the gun and that is in the game, and that is definitely somber in the game. But she's pretty determined to go hunting the people who did this right away. And one of the things that was actually a little jarring at first for me was how she was still kind of being jokey and her usual self. The scene where Gail comes in to talk to her in the hospital felt weird. And I kind of get it. It's been 3 months. It's a little bit different to her just being initially immediately angry like she was in the games. But I really appreciated that when she left the room and she was given the all clear to leave and go back to normal life, as normal as it gets in Jackson anyway, that shot of her walking down the hallway where her face changes to anger, or to whatever you want to call it, where the facade of this positivity that she was putting on the show of for Gail to present herself as being normal. And I think that's something that's here throughout the episode. It's just a really big change because in the game, there's no real reason for her to do that. I'm talking about both the way she talks to Gail in that scene where she's trying to convince her she's fine and ready to go back to life. And then also the town hall meeting, which is entirely new. None of that is in the game. This idea of having a town hall meeting about sending people to go and get the culprits, get the murderers who did this to Joel. Not a thing. In the game, Ellie just decides she's going. Dina says, "I'm going with you." And Maria finds out about it in the game and actually gets annoyed because, and this is, I don't know if I should say this, because they might do something with this later, so I'm actually not going to say it. But there is a change here. People who have played the games will know what I'm talking about. But regardless, it's something they kind of decide. There's no committee, there's no town hall, there's none of that. And I think there's both good and bad that comes from this. I think the interesting stuff that's good is getting more with Seth, because Seth was, Seth didn't have any of this in the game. Seth had the apology scene, and then later a flashback to what he said at the dance. And that was it, as far as I recall. There was nothing else with Seth. Here, they're giving him a little bit more to do. They're kind of setting this idea up that he agrees with the anger, and if anything, to me, that should be a sign for Ellie. Ellie should maybe recognize that the one who's agreeing with her and is letting his anger out and like letting his rage bubble up publicly is the one guy that she kind of hates for being a bigot. Maybe she should see that as like a warning sign that all this hatred she's feeling and wants to go and commit revenge is maybe not something she should be given into, perhaps. I do actually really like that. I like it because, one, because there's this awkward idea of her like getting support from this guy who said something awful to her and clearly has deep-seated feelings against her, or against gay people in general. But at the same time, I also like this idea that if we're exploring the themes of anger or revenge and murder and these kind of things, and this idea that it's unhealthy, the idea that this guy is the one who's happy to be vocal and say, oh, we should go and hunt them down because they did something to us. We're just a bunch of victims if we don't go kill them. Anyway, he sounds like, a nut job. He sounds like anyone who says, oh, you have to eye for an eye. It's always eye for an eye. Like, he sounds like one of those guys. It's clearly the wrong path. But you also get the feeling that this is what Ellie wishes she could say. And that's the interesting part here to me, is that she writes this speech to try and convince everyone that this isn't about revenge, that this is about justice. And I'm really mixed on this part of it, because I kind of get it. Like, I get kind of what it's going for, because it is kind of a lie. And other characters even say, did you buy what she said during that speech? And, no. Like, I mean, I certainly didn't, because I just know Ellie from the game, and it just felt, it'd be such a weird pivot if this was kind of what she was actually feeling the entire time. This felt more like she was just trying to say the right things to convince them to give them a party, of 16 people, which is actually quite a big amount of people, to go hunting Abby and her friends. Because as the other thing, Dina revealed that she didn't know and hear a bunch of names, and the WLF, the WILF, the Washington Liberation Front, like, they have enough information to kind of steer pretty, like they know what city to go to. They know what group they're looking for. So, yeah, I think I'm conflicted about it, because I like seeing Jackson sort of being functional and how it works in its diplomatic sense. But I do also think it's well, I do appreciate the Seth part of it, and I even appreciate Ellie trying to kind of convince them of something that, convincing them that this isn't just an unhealthy bloodlust, it's a desire for rage that's kind of like, as Tommy even points out, that she's acting kind of like Joel to some extent. Not in the, like, that he would hunt someone down. He actually specifically points out to her that Joel wouldn't do that. Joel would just blame himself. But this idea that she would make justifications for the thing that she really wants to do, that she'd be lashing out like Joel would. Right, that's all fine. I think there's just one fundamental thing about the scene that kind of felt a little false to me the entire time, and that is the idea that anyone would entertain any of this as anything other than just revenge. Because that's what it is. And if you're going to commit to traveling across the country just to assassinate people, like, as soon as you start debating it like this, it's clear just how psychotic it is. And you get on a personal level why Ellie wants to do it. And Dina, of course, is ride or die for her, and also cares about Joel, as the show has made very clear. And I do really like that about the show. It did feel a bit weird to have people even entertain it. I mean, I was glad the vote wasn't even that close. It was pretty, it looked 50-50 to begin with, but then it was like 8-3 were no's. That's at least a good ratio, I think, because it's clearly an unhealthy choice. And one of the justifications that Seth gives in his little rant when he's supporting all this idea is that, well, they're just going to come back someday because they know where we are and they think we're weak. And it's just this very kind of, toxic masculinity kind of disguising as logic kind of thing. But yeah, like this idea, if we go and do this, all it's going to do is give them a reason to come back and attack us again. It's just going to start perpetuating some cycle of vengeance, right? And that's one of the big themes that we're playing with here. And I think once you start openly talking about this, it's clear that that's all it is, regardless of any arguments that Ellie tries to make. I did kind of like that Tommy and Maria both look quite proud of her for like putting some thoughts together that weren't just her swearing and saying they have to go kill them. But in a weird way, having her having to slow down and kind of try and convince people this way almost kind of, I don't know, it felt a little bit weird to me. And I think some of this stuff, like, there's some interesting elements in there that is adding to the characters and the themes, but there's also just kind of a general sense of none of this was there in the game. It didn't need it to be there, and this episode would have been too short if we didn't have this sort of middle section where there was a chance that she might convince the town to actually make it a formal thing with an entire hunting party. Because in reality, or let's say reality, in the video game, it basically just skips this entire section and goes to them wanting to leave. And they leave. Right? There's not that much more to it. But if you take out that, like, I mean, from after the scene where Dina talks to Ellie and gives her the cookies, right? And their chemistry's still great, by the way. I thought that the entire episode. I think one of the things they've absolutely nailed here is making Dina likable. If we don't have Joel anymore and we don't have the chemistry between Joel and Ellie to hinge on, then the relationship between Dina and Ellie had to be nailed, and I feel like they did. I feel like they are so likable. I think Dina's very likable, and is kind of like in support of Ellie, but is kind of a bit of a voice of reason as well, and I think that's perfect for what Dina's supposed to be. So all that stuff is great. They're really not docking anything from that. But everything from after that scene with the cookies to Dina coming over and saying, hey, I'll go with you, here's a map, don't just be an idiot and go without proper supplies. Everything in between those two scenes, like, it is completely new, right? And if you took it out and you basically just said that as soon as Ellie got out of the hospital and found out who the people were and where they were, she would just start making plans to leave and go, and Dina would decide to go with her, because that's literally what happened in the game. So it was a little bit difficult during that scene, or those scenes, but specifically the town hall meeting scene, to not just constantly feel like I was looking for, okay, what justifies this other than just time? Other than just needing to pad it out for the sake of having an hour-long episode, because you want to end at a certain point, right? You have to end whatever this chapter's at the point you're ending it at. And that's a bit unfair in some ways. This is something that I can only do because it is an adaptation, and I've seen what it is without these extra bits. And this show often is very good at having nice little extra bits that feel like they're adding to characters, to themes, whatever it may be. But I'm always kind of looking for it whenever it does something new. And I think here I was sitting going, oh, they've made some interesting choices here, but I don't think every single part of it is necessarily additive, or at the very least, not every single part of it feels like it's justifying being here. Like, part of me thinks that the episode would almost be stronger, because, and maybe again, this is just because I've played the game, but to me, Ellie would just want to go immediately. And I am biased in that. I am clouded by already experiencing this story in a different way. So there's this kind of weird thing when it starts doing this extra little branching path before it gets back on track, where the entire time I'm looking at it going, okay, but what justifies this? Why is this a good addition? Why is this worth us taking time to do this instead of just going to the next bit, which we could have done? And it's not like it's got no merit. There's like I say, there's some elements in there that I think are cool character bits, or interesting in how it kind of puts Seth and Ellie kind of on the same side, and all the ways you can read into that, like I was kind of getting at. But ultimately, it it feels mean to just say it felt like a bit of filler to pad out the episode, but at a certain point, I did kind of feel that, and I got excited again once we'd gotten past it. Once it got to the point where Dina was coming over to see Ellie and she was just prepping to leave, I was like, yeah, it's time. Like, here we go. Like, we're getting ready to go. So, you know, take that for what it is. I think that alone, that feeling that I had throughout that middle chunk of the episode, instantly makes this my least favorite of the 3 episodes that we've had this season. And I think just by its nature, like, we were never going to catapult too quickly to them already being in Seattle. They had to go through this part of the story. They had to give us this, but it does kind of feel like a bit of a halted pace. I will say, it's I'm expecting flashbacks with Joel. Not just because it happens in the game, but I think it just makes sense anyway. I do think it's right though to not have any of that this episode, and maybe even for a few episodes, because simply put, you want to feel the absence. You want, the character just died. You want to make it feel like he's not there anymore, and feel that hole. So it'll feel special when we get a little glimpse of him again when we get flashbacks at some point. So like that. Also very interesting, Gail sort of prodding Ellie about the last time she spoke to Joel, and Ellie saying that she wished she could have talked to him on the porch that night, but she didn't, and she kind of regrets it. But she's also been kind of flippant here, and how serious can we take what she's saying, I think is open for a debate. I will say Gail's shtick feels a little one note at this point. I wasn't too fussed about it in this opening scene with Ellie in the hospital. I think by the time Tommy was speaking to her, though, and she started talking about how there's not a shrink for her to go see, about how many people she's having to give therapy to right now, and it's a lot of pressure and stuff. I was kind of feeling, okay, I get it, right? You're drunk and high a lot to put up with things. You made that point in the very first scene we ever saw you in. So the character's feeling a little bit one note for me. And this character is new for the show, so it does kind of feel like, other than maybe if something else happens at the town later in the season, it doesn't seem like there's going to be that much for her to do. But I mean, maybe there will be. It's entirely possible. Well, maybe not. Actually, I was going to say it's entirely possible next episode we get like scenes of like the characters in the town reacting to Ellie and Dina being missing. But technically, we kind of skip over a lot of that time in this because we get like a montage of them traveling, which clearly takes weeks, maybe months. So we're already way past that in the timeline, unless there's a reason to flash back to the moments where they all realize that they're gone, which could happen later. It seems like we probably won't do that. So we do get Ellie visiting Joel's grave because it's a couple of miles outside of town. That's a nice scene. She plants seeds because if I recall correctly, Joel talked about wanting a tree to grow out of his grave or something like that. Very beautifully shot scene. The way the sun was behind her and she was in silhouette, sort of golden hour type stuff. Really, really pretty. Loved that. Really no complaints from a visual standpoint in this episode. There was a few really nice things. The music was also fantastic this episode. It's mostly themes that were in the game, but that was true of season 1 as well. But it's like new compositions of them. It's making them fit into these scenes. Her breathing into Joel's jacket, for example, was another moment where just the emotion of these bits were hitting quite well. I think. So I mean the journey itself, they've got some playful banter backwards and forwards. The big emotional beat before they get to the city, though, is they're on the same trail that the group that we saw earlier were on, and they whistled, and because they whistle sort of as a covert way of communicating over a bit of a distance, and they hid in fear. We didn't know how that ended, and then towards the end of the episode with Ellie and Dina, we see that they've all been massacred, and the assumption here is that maybe Abby's group did this on the way back. That's a little bit of a reach, given that Abby's group went out of their way to not kill anyone but Joel. Whereas here, we get the horrific visual of all these people being massacred, including a dead child. There's a little girl who we saw in the first scene with this group who is lying there dead. It's a really stark image, so anyone who's wanting a cheery time this episode wasn't going to get it. But it feels very horrific, and yeah, I mean, it certainly points to either a really villainous group or a larger conflict is happening here between multiple groups. Now, I do know the answer to this, of course. I'm saying what the episode is presenting to us, but it does kind of tie into the idea of Ellie being so blinded by rage that she's immediately blaming Abby specifically. Like, oh, Abby and her group they're monsters. They would do this. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean to say that she's completely wrong. Like, maybe Abby's group is associated with the group that did this, but it feels like Ellie's immediately like, oh no, I'm painting her as the devil. She is clearly Satan incarnate, and she is behind this. So we're, for now, we're really focusing on that idea. And yeah, they get back on the road. And we get some big visual effects shots as they're out in the highway, getting into the city. We see it in the distance. It looks pretty good. I mean, you can kind of tell it's a composite. It's obviously naturally it has a bit of a quality to it where you can tell it's just not a real shot. But and obviously it isn't because this doesn't exist. But it just it looks pretty good for TV show standards certainly. And they do confirm that at least one of the people in the group, I think it was Manny was the name, is working with the WLF here. At the end of the episode, he's a lookout. And the reveal at the end, which kind of comes after a lot of discussion between Ellie and Dina about how there might not be that many of this group because they've not heard of them, in years. And Dina's only heard of them because Eugene mentioned them once or twice. They think, oh, it's not going to be a big group, and there's going to be a lot less of them because Ellie's going to go kill them. And the reveal at the end of the episode is that they've got a tank. And there's like a lot of people with heavy machine guns like walking down the street in formation. So this is a much bigger threat that now that we only have two characters possibly coming up against is kind of a thing. So what's interesting about this is that this is a very TV show thing to have this moment. And what I mean by that is that in the game, there's absolutely a group this big, if not much bigger than this, that you go through. Because as you're playing as Ellie, you're killing so many people in this group. So clearly there is this many. But because it's a TV show, they've went out of their way to have a moment of like showing the audience, oh no, this is a very large group that are very well prepared and armed. And it does make it feel like an impossible task that Ellie and Dina, but mostly Ellie by herself, is going to somehow go through this group, and arguably might make it very impressive depending on how successful she is compared to the game. Because it's a video game, you just naturally kill a lot of people because it's a game and you're constantly in situations where you're taking people out. But this definitely, because it's a TV show, wanted to have the moment of like, hey, we're showing off how much of an imposing force this is. There's nothing like this moment in the game, but it's not like betraying the game or doing something different. It's just presenting it in a very kind of cliffhanger way to make us go, oh shit, there's tons of them. So, no, I think that's just a very interesting, different medium choice to have this moment, especially since they set it up by having Ellie and Dina speculate all episode. I guess the other big scene with Ellie and Dina we have to talk about is them in the tent when they're going to sleep before they get to Seattle, which, they basically, it's another flirtatious scene where Dina brings up the kiss from New Year's, and they both kind of say that they were drunk and or high, and therefore it didn't mean anything. And she even says that she's been back with Jesse again since. But at the end of the scene, Dina says she wasn't that high to kind of imply that it wasn't a completely crazy thing she did. It feels like she's hinting at the idea that there was some intention behind the kiss, which I think we all felt as an audience. It felt like there was sparks flying when that was happening. Interesting to see how they progress this, but it does look like Ellie's smiling there as she's lying next to her in the tent in the dark. I think it is interesting because the way this is presented with all these beats like in between the trip to Seattle, whereas in the game, because it basically just like goes straight there, and it like, it's not that there's no banter between the characters, there is, but it's still very somber. Whereas here, it's a lot more upbeat because there's still this flirtation, there's still this positive element to the relationship going backwards and forwards. And it's kind of a weirdly different experience that it's almost a little jarring because I'm expecting Ellie to just have her like eyes like laser focused and be like, I'm going to kill those sons of bitches, and not in the mood for jokes or anything. But it feels like, no, she is bantering with Dina on the road, and that does feel different. And I don't think it's necessarily like bad or worse. because I think about the context of it being a TV show, and if I imagine, a lot of the chemistry and the likability of these two characters as a pair with their dynamic, I think you would lose a lot of that if they did just go, she is just dour and like angry the entire time. But it is different. It does feel like it's maybe, it makes the, like, her determination feel like a little bit less potent compared to the game, at least so far. So I'll be curious to see how that kind of, where that sort of feels as we go forward and more events happen and things ramp up. I will say this though, the idea that she gets frustrated that the town isn't going to send a group isn't a bad idea either though. I just think that the entire debate of like the justification for it's a little bit strange. It is notable that Tommy looked a little bit disappointed by the result as well. So I think he's got some more. I think he's got some more. What's the phrase I'm looking for? Fish to cook. That's not the phrase I'm looking for. More fish to fry. That's a phrase? I didn't just make that up. Yeah, that's a thing. Yeah. So very, very, very interesting episode because I don't think it's a complete winner like a lot of episodes of this show have been. As someone who's played the games and is kind of constantly naturally comparing it, and obviously it's interesting, I assume there's people reviewing this show who have not played the games, and it'd be very curious to see what a lot of those people think. The shock of last week's death probably is a big part of that, I imagine. But it just because there's so many little things that they're adding, and for the most part, they usually do really well with adding to things. But this episode in particular, it felt like, well, we don't want to like get into the Seattle stuff yet. We want to end it with them just getting to Seattle. We want to just tease it at the end with seeing the city in the distance. And that's fine. I totally get that. But it means that they had, because it's HBO and they have this like sort of desire to always have it be almost an hour long. It's always at least 55 minutes. It's like, oh, we have to have this extra like stage to the story to fill it out. And I guess I never quite shook the feeling that that's what that middle section was. Seeing the other group in Seattle, I don't think feels that way though. It is interesting and different, and arguably once I've seen the whole season, maybe I'll sort of evaluate if I feel like it was a mistake to do that or not. But I think with that, at least, well, you could argue, oh, they're doing it for a little bit extra time, because it pays off later with Ellie and Dina finding the bodies. And because this group are going to be a factor later on, it felt like more of an intentional decision just to seed them a bit earlier as opposed to, doing anything else. And it definitely felt like a dark revelation when we found the bodies. It definitely painted something and, it created some tension and some suspense of who did this and how bad they are. It did sort of raise the stakes in a way that was interesting. And then from a character perspective, Ellie just jumping to like, oh, I'm going to blame Abby for this because it's clearly Abby. She is the worst. She is the devil. And I cannot consider any other possibility because she's not obsessed, of course. She is completely level-headed as Ellie. So, yeah, I just, I think that stuff is mostly a win. I have no real complaints other than just the fact that when this group were introduced in the game later on, there was more of a mystique to them. And maybe there's arguably a mistake of giving them this more humanizing kind of moment where they're the victims in a sequence. So maybe that's the one like debate I think you could have here. And that might arguably be right. It depends what they do with them later, but curious all the same. But anyway, that is my thoughts on episode 3 of The Last of Us. It's definitely more of a mixed bag. But it's always like, as much as I'm not like as super hot in this episode, and I think it makes maybe some decisions that don't really pan out or don't hit the entire time. It like, I was never not fascinated just seeing what they did with it. Like, it's almost like when it's not completely landing, I'm at least having fun kind of thinking about why it's not working or why they've made certain choices to differentiate from the game or whatever it might be. Like, there's always kind of a nice layer to it where I'm kind of enjoying the meta side of it, or the analyzing of the adaptation side of it. But obviously not everyone's going to have that. But then again, the people who haven't played the game probably wouldn't necessarily feel some of the same things anyway. So, anywho, there you go. That's episode 3 of the season. Be back next week with episode 4, of course. Let me know what you thought of this one in the comments. And of course, you can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV or via YouTube membership if that's more your thing. Any support from anywhere is greatly appreciated. Thank you very much for joining. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?